if you've been to this website before, you know one of my favorite designers is Gordon Murray. He designed, of course, the iconic McLaren F1, as well as the Rocket, 775 pounds, almost as fast as the McLaren F1. A car that greatly influenced Gordon Murray was the Lotus Elan. I had heard a lot about Lotus Elans. I knew about them, but when I was a kid, a Lotus Elan was a pretty expensive car, almost as expensive as a Corvette. In fact, probably a little bit more expensive. And when you're 18, 19, 20 years old, a Corvette with a big engine and 300 horsepower, and it's a lot more enticing than a little English sports car with about 126 horsepower. So I never quite got into the Lotus Elan. But as time went on, they grew more and more legendary. And Gordon Murray always described it as his favorite car. So I said, you know, I like everything else that Gordon has done. I want to go back and find out what influenced him. And you know something? Once again, he was right. It's one of the most fantastic sports cars of all time. I happen to find a tremendous buy one Lotus, get one free sale going on. You know, I was looking for a Lotus, and I couldn't find one. And then in a week, I found two. This was a car that I saw. This is a 1969 Lotus Elan. I saw this car, about 10 years ago. The original owner got it when he was 19 years old. I said, gee, if you ever want to sell that car, let me know. And sadly, some time passed, about 10 years, and I got a call from his wife, and he had passed away. And she said that she knew that I always liked this car, and did I want to buy it? And I said, sure. I went over to look at it. What had happened was he had disassembled it. He had taken the head off to do some work on it. Sadly had gotten ill and passed away. So I bought the car from her, and we rebuilt it with the help of Jim. You know, Jim Hall, our chief fabricator here. Jim is an expert in these Lotus Elans. Now I kind of smile to myself when people talk about lightweight modern sports cars. The Carrera GT, 3,200 pounds, the ZR1 Corvette, 3,200 pounds. Even the McLaren F1 was the lightest car of its day at 2,600 pounds. This, 1,580 pounds. Pretty amazing, yet it's got a radio and a heater and a top and electric windows. This is the car that inspired the Miata. You know, you put a Miata next to this and it looks like a Peterbilt truck. It's that much smaller. But surprisingly, I'm 6 feet tall. I fit in it. There's plenty of room. It's almost the perfect sports car. Excellent gas mileage. There aren't very many cars that can stay with this thing on a windy road, especially if you know what you're doing. You don't want to get hit in an SUV in this thing, okay? It's all fiberglass, okay? It's not really a safety car, but if you look at safety as being able to avoid traffic and dart quickly in and out and, you know, go around corners quickly without tipping over, then maybe I guess it's a safe car. I'm just making excuses. You know, you got a lot of wives watch this stuff, so you got to say these things. The hood doesn't lift up, it just comes off. You just take it off, you put it off to the side. You know, in America we had the 283 Chevy, the 327 Chevy, the 265, or the 289 Ford, any of those small block motors. This was the small block motor for England. This is the equivalent of the small block Chevy power plant. This is the one everybody hopped up. This is the one they made all the performance parts for. Stock, these had exactly 1,558 cc's, twin overhead cam, 8 valves, alloy head, cast iron block, Weber carburetors. Stock, the power was about 126 horsepower. Torque was 113 foot-pounds. 4-speed, rear-wheel drive. Independent front suspension with coil springs. Front disc brakes are 241 millimeter, rear with 254. Top speed new was about 120 miles an hour. And you can get a lot of horsepower out of these cars. This one is, Jim has modified it. We're getting about, it's up to about what, 1,700 cc's? Something
about 1,700 cc's, yeah. About 160 horsepower.
Originally the car had a generator, which weighed about what, 12 pounds? 15
well, it's probably
pounds?
more than that, probably 15 pounds.
Yeah, probably 15 pounds. If you got one of these cars, or even an MG or an English car, you can get a modern alternator off one of the little Chevys, any of those modern cars. You see it right there, weigh about 4 pounds, 2 to 3 times the output. You save weight, and there's no loss. I mean, it's a terrific way to go. Plus, it's an alternator, not a generator, so you're making current constantly. We've put headers on it.
A large aluminum radiator in it, because making more horsepower and being a British car, they always like to overheat. This won't overheat. required a lot of modifications, special swirl pots. What a swirl pot does, water circulates through an engine and you can get air trapped in it. So in the swirl pot, it comes out of the engine, it spins it around before it goes into the radiator, and that allows steam bubbles to come out so that you get maximum cooling from the radiator. Jay likes driving this car so hard that it wanted to leak oil. So this little gizmo here is an air oil separator, which separates any oil out that would come out of the crankcase breather and runs it back into the crankcase. The engine breathes through this pipe, comes in underneath the baffle. Any oil that's in there drops to the bottom and just vapors go out the top. Weber carburetors that he mentioned over here, this is a European only option for this car. We had to have a mold made in this air box made out of fiberglass because you can't get them here in the United States. Special camshafts, special connecting rods, special crank, and it's a really, really sweet motor. Dave Bean Engineering supplied a lot of the parts to us.
Just go on the web, Google Lotus and Dave Bean, and you'll see he's got everything for these cars. And I'm always grateful for the specialist manufacturers or aftermarket people that keep this up, because there's a lot of these cars on the road, but to keep them on the road, you need those kind of guys.
When we got the car, we ended up going through the transmission, the rear axle, the axles, the suspension. We pretty much did all the safety-related stuff that a car could possibly need, because we want to be as safe as it was when it was new.
Right, and the nice thing about this car, it's a one-owner car, and that's even the original paint. So that's pretty good. It's a well-cared-for car. Well, here, let's take it next door. We'll put it up on the rack, and we'll show you what makes it such a cool car. I always love this badge. Remember they won Indy with Jim Clark? Huge deal. After that, everybody was rear engine. There were no more front engine cars after that. Here's the key to the Lotus, also the Achilles heel, some would say, is this steel frame. I mean, the only steel you have is here. Everything outward is just all fiberglass. And everything kind of bolts to this. This is where all your electrical problems come from too, because it's hard to get a good ground on these things. But once you get them set up,
it's like a Corvette or something.
Yeah, very much so.
You really have to have
very much so.
Lots of oil.
As you can see, Jim did a wonderful job here. This is a car that gets used quite a bit. It's not a show car, it's a driver, so it's pretty clean under here for a driver.
Well, to me it's important to point out that we haven't restored this car. This is pretty much as we got it, with the exception that we did all the safety stuff.
And the motor.
And the motor.
Yeah, motor was shot, but other than that, it was a well-maintained original car. And we also changed the rear end here. This is another key point. Now, there are purists that say, oh, they love the rubber donuts because they slide and you feel, well, they're going to let go. But if you're putting 40 or 50 extra horsepower through it, you want to convert to this. Now, it's a little bit heavier, but it's much stronger and obviously a lot safer. Jim, explain what we did here.
The original drive shafts had, we call them rubber donuts, they're Rotoflex joints. And there were two of them, just like these axles have two CV joints like a modern front-wheel drive car would have. So we put new axles in the rear end, new stub axles on the outboard side, new brake discs, and these CV joint axles. The original axles had these Rotoflex joints. If you looked really closely, you'd see that these are all cracked.
Right.
The rubber goes bad. And your day goes really bad if one of these joints explodes on you while you're driving 100 miles an hour.
And it really is just rubber. You go around a corner, it's just flexing in and out. And like we said, some people liked it because you could feel when they were about to let go. But they let go. But like you say, especially in California, you know, you leave a rubber band out in California with the air here, you put it on a table, come back in here, you pick it up, it literally falls apart in your hand. And the air here tends to eat through all rubber, makes it very corrosive. So that's why you want to convert to the heavier axle. I mean, it is heavier, but boy, it's a lot safer.
It's interesting to me that these fabricated A-arms on this car, that's stock.
Yeah.
We put new bushings in them, but this is just the way the factory made them.
Right.
They weren't cheap cars to build because a lot of hand labor went into building these cars.
Right, and Lotus was not a successful car company profit-wise until the Elan came out. This is the car that made them somewhat successful, and the first car they could really, really mass produce, at least by English production standard. I'm not sure how many they built, maybe 3,000 altogether, but really an iconic sports car. Some people think it's the best English sports car ever made. You know, when you went back to the 60s, when everything else was a heavy metal chassis, body on chassis, this was breakthrough technology, really experimental, fascinating stuff. Nobody was building anything like this. When this car came out, well, there was nothing equivalent to it. It was the best handling and one of the fastest, 0 to 60 in under 7 seconds, which doesn't sound fast now. But you know, if you bought a 66 Hemi Satellite, it was about the same 0 to 60. Yeah, they were quick. They were quick.
Well, and the other thing that they did on this, the car that preceded it was the Lotus Elite.
Right.
And they tried to do an entire fiberglass car, which caused huge headaches with things. When they came up with this backbone steel frame, it made it easier for them to build and easier to maintain.
Right. Now we have some footage that we shot in the, at least in the restoration of the engine of this car, and let's take a look at that now. Like I've always said, whenever you buy a car with a rebuilt engine, that means you have to build it again. This is an engine that supposedly had the bottom end done and all it needed was a head put on, a few other things. Well, obviously that's not true, and Jim is a Lotus guy from way back. This is his motor. He's been working on these since well, since you were my age.
Yes,
yeah,
pretty much.
Yeah, yeah. Jim has completely gone through the motor of our 69 Elan. Tell him what you've done here.
Right now you're seeing it it's almost done, very, very close to being finished. We put a stroker crank in it so we could get a little bit more displacement. We put high compression pistons in it, they're forged pistons. We put Carrillo rods in it, which this engine now could rev to 9,500 RPM and stay together.
And it will.
The final fine-tuning thing when you install camshafts on an engine is called setting the cam timing. And we use a dial indicator, we use a degree wheel, and we use little offset bushings and move everything back and forth until we get the timing of the cam so that it's just perfect.
This was in everything. Jim Clark raced them in the Cortinas, certainly the Elan. Well, this motor never ran in Indy, did it? No, not this small.
No,
that was
this
the V8.
was too small.
Yeah.
They actually used the block as a test bed to develop their DFV race engine, though, right, which eventually became the DFX Indy motor. Yeah. So there's tie-in. Next, I'll finish finally bolting everything together. Then we're going to take it to an engine dyno and run it on a dyno for about a half a day because Jay likes to go fast.
Yeah, they don't trust me to break it in.
He doesn't like to break things in.
No.
So we're going to do it on a dynamometer. We'll find out exactly how much horsepower it takes. And then when you go take it for a road test, you'll know you're making 163 horsepower.
9,500 RPM. Makes a great sound. And they're really quite fast. Like a lot of the British products in the 60s, there were a lot of reliability problems. Americans were a lot harder on cars than the English were. The English didn't have the great highways that we did where you're running sort of flat out all the time, 5, 6 grand for hours on end on freeways. And, things would rattle loose and there were electrical problems. But once you solve those, boy, it's an amazing car. Nothing like it, even today. I mean, this car is 1,550 pounds. That's nothing. That's half of what a Corvette weighs. There's a whole generation of drivers now that don't really understand what a light sports car is. No power steering, no anything. I love the traditional Smith gauges. You got a radio, you got a heater, you got electric windows. In a car like this, 60 feels like 100, as opposed to a lot of modern cars where 100 feels like 60. So you get a real sense of driving. Although there are a lot of cars in the period that had low horsepower, not many had this good a power to weight ratio, and that's what it is. It's how many horsepower versus how many pounds you're pushing. Every option is available for these cars. You can make them even lighter. You can take another couple of 100 pounds out of these things. Plus they make 5-speed and 6-speed transmissions. So these cars can remain competitive long after they were built and designed. When you drive a modern sports car like a Viper or even a Corvette, they're wide cars. You take up your whole lane. This car, you can literally slide around in your own lane, and you still got plenty of room. I know it's cliche to say it has go-kart-like handling, but It has go-kart-like handling. I know they can be a little temperamental. The nice thing is when they break, you really can fix it yourself. And when you work on a car yourself, when you make it run, there's a great deal of satisfaction in that. You know, as much as I like driving the modern cars like the R8 Audi and all of that stuff, you can't do anything to it. It's hard to sort of bond with the car. Whereas this thing, when it breaks down by the side of the road, and you get out and you fix it and you go, oh, you feel like you've done something. Yeah, that's pretty good. I fixed it. I guess I forgot to mention the pop-up headlights. That was a big deal back in the 60s. You know, the nice thing about cars from this era is they are eminently rebuildable. You can rebuild them over and over and over again. You know, modern cars that are meant to be sort of biodegradable or have electronic parts that will soon be obsolete, I don't know how you can restore those. This car I've kept roadworthy. The Lotus you saw, the white one sitting next to it, we're going to build that up to be a little bit more high performance. This one's 160 horse. I'm hoping to get 210 or 220 out of the other one. But this is the everyday road car, and it's fantastic. I mean, I know the car has a radio, but why would you listen to it when you can hear this? It's almost hard for me to convey how much fun this car is to drive. I see why this is Gordon Murray's favorite car. This car was the inspiration for the F1 McLaren and the Rocket. Just a fantastic, light, quick, agile sports car. And if you do some sensible modifications like a high-performance aluminum radiator, she'll never overheat, and it's extremely dependable. Since we built this car, I've had no problems with it at all. I've used it quite a bit as an everyday car. Because of safety standards and things such as that, I'll never be able to make a car as light as this again. But these are still reasonably priced. If you can find one for $20,000 to $25,000, grab it. You'll have a lifetime worth of fun and it'll last forever. I know what you're thinking, but will it do a burnout? Let's find out. Well, that's about it. I'll see you next week.